Something very serious is hovering over Baltimore right now, and the name behind it is Matthew Judon. When a player that's well known with real history in the building suddenly becomes available, the reaction is almost automatic. The idea feels good, comfortable, familiar, and that's exactly why it can be misleading. Because not every decision driven by memory actually fixes what's broken on the field today. Before assuming bringing Judon back is the answer for the defense, you have to slow down and look at the current reality. What sounds like a boost can turn into a setback. What feels like help can cause valuable snaps. And what brings back good memories may no longer have the same impact. Stick with this until the end, because once all the pieces line up, this move starts to look far more dangerous than it seems at first glance. When Matthew Judon's name pops up as being released, the reaction is almost instinctive. It's that quick thought of, he's been here before, it worked once, so why not now? Judon built a big part of his NFL identity, wearing a Ravens uniform. He was respected, productive, and a defining presence in defenses that felt more reliable than the current one. That kind of emotional connection always carries weight when a team is clearly struggling. The timing of this news only adds fuel to that feeling. The Ravens are still alive in the race, but far from a clean, well-oiled team, especially when it comes to getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks. When a familiar name becomes available at a position of need, the connection happens instantly, almost without thought, like the solution is just sitting there waiting to be picked up. There's also the memory factor. Judon wasn't just another guy who passed through Baltimore. He produced, he brought energy, and he played a real role on defenses that simply worked better than what we're seeing now. That created a positive image that's hard to ignore, because our brains naturally link past success to future answers, even when the context has completely changed. And that's exactly where the conversation gets deeper. Behind the tempting idea of bringing back a familiar face, there's a present-day reality that demands a much closer look. Before deciding whether Judon can help, you have to understand who he is on the field right now, and that's what completely shifts this discussion. Once you step away from the memories and focus on what actually happened in 2025, the picture changes fast. Judon played in 13 games, logged 337 defensive snaps, and still finished that stretch without a single sack. For a player whose identity has always been built around pressuring quarterbacks, that number hits hard. It's a clear sign his on-field impact has dropped. Age plays a role here, whether people like it or not. At 33 years old, Judon is past the physical peak that defined his best years in Baltimore. That's not unusual in the NFL, especially for pass rushers who rely on burst, strength, and speed to win reps. The body responds differently, and the game demands more effort for less return. None of this erases his career or takes away from what he's accomplished, but it does explain why the Dolphins made the decision to let him go. This wasn't just a random or financial move. It was a performance-based evaluation. When a player stops producing a role that defines his value, alarms go off, and that drop in production completely changes how a potential signing should be viewed. You can't just look at the name or the past if the current impact isn't there. At that point, the conversation stops being emotional and becomes practical, especially when you start weighing cost versus value within the current roster. At first glance, Judon's contract looks almost harmless. There would be roughly $427,000 left for the rest of the season, which is a small number by NFL standards, especially for a veteran. That makes a lot of people think, why not take a shot? Like the risk is basically non-existent. But football rarely works that way. The real cost of a signing doesn't show up only on the salary sheet. It shows up in snaps, roster spots, and weekly decisions. Bringing Judon in would mean giving him playing time, coaching attention, and potentially taking opportunities away from players who are already integrated into the system and doing what's being asked of them. On top of that, even with the Ravens struggling to generate sacks, there's no real guarantee Judon would change that. Recent numbers show he hasn't been a difference maker, and hoping that suddenly flips late in the season is more wishful thinking than smart planning. This becomes even more important when you look at the internal structure of the defense. The issue isn't just a lack of names, but how those names fit into the rotation. And once you look at who's already there, it's clear the space for Judon is much smaller than it seems.
All right, we're already past the halfway point of this video, but before we continue, I noticed you haven't left a like yet. It's really important because it helps YouTube keep showing you my content so I can keep bringing you the best news about the Baltimore Ravens. So go ahead and hit that like button. It's free and it really helps. Thanks. Now let's get back to it.
With Tavius Robinson returning from injury, the Ravens already added another meaningful body to the outside linebacker rotation. On top of that, players like Kyle Van Noy, Draymond Jones, and Mike Green all have defined roles and demand heavy snap counts because they either produce or fill specific needs within Zach or scheme. That creates a tight situation where every snap has to be carefully managed. Adding Juden wouldn't just be about extra depth. It would mean directly disrupting a rotation that's already functioning as well as it can. Someone would lose reps, and that choice would be hard to justify based on Juden's current form. Historically, the Ravens value continuity and trust in internal development. Players who grind week after week in the system usually have an edge over late-season additions, especially when those additions aren't coming in at a high level of play. In that environment, Juden would be starting at a disadvantage from day one, and that battle for snaps leads to an obvious consequence. Someone pays a price. When you look closely at the roster, there's a specific name who would feel it immediately, which helps explain why the front office is likely to stay away from this move right now. David Ojabo has started to show real signs of growth over the last few weeks. He's contributing on special teams, something John Harbaugh values heavily, and he's also posted solid offensive numbers in his last 4 games with pressures, tackles, and strong pro football focus grades. That points to genuine progress, even if he's not a star yet. Bringing in Juden would, in practice, mean reducing or even eliminating Ojabo snaps. And that goes directly against how the Ravens usually operate, especially when younger players begin to respond on the field. Cutting off that growth for a lateral move simply doesn't fit the organization's philosophy. That's why the only scenario even remotely considered will be a much quieter one, letting Juden clear waivers and, if that happens, signing him to the practice squad. In that role, he'd serve as emergency depth, with the option to be elevated on game days if needed. Even then, the move will be more about insurance than strategy. Everything points to the Ravens sticking with what they already have and trusting the players producing right now. That brings the conversation full circle. The reunion sounds appealing, but once football reality sets in, it quickly loses its shine. All of this makes one thing clear. A potential Matthew Juden return isn't about name value or nostalgia. It's about timing and judgment. The Ravens have real defensive issues, but this move wouldn't meaningfully fix them and could disrupt a rotation that's finally finding some balance. In a tight stretch like this, every snap, every decision, and every detail matters far more than memories from years ago. The bigger picture is that choices like this don't affect just one player. They affect the entire team, letting Ojabo keep developing, protecting special teams, and trusting the guys producing right now may not grab headlines, but it's usually the safer path if the goal is to compete until the end. Betting on Juden would mean trading continuity for a gamble with little upside. So put yourself in that chair for a second. If this call were yours to make, would you bring Matthew Juden back purely for the history, or would you stick with the current roster and invest in what this team is still trying to build this season? Either way, one thing is clear. Decisions like this say everything about where the Ravens believe they're headed next.
And if you, just like me, are passionate about the world of football and want to learn more about the Ravens' legacy, don't leave this video without sharing it with that friend who is also a Baltimore Ravens fan and will love this content. See those video suggestions on your screen? The first one was handpicked just for you, and the other is a recommendation from YouTube itself.